All right, guys, let's get into the unit circle explanation if you are still having difficulties with it. As a reminder, we did already fill out the first quadrant together, explained. So if you need that explained again, you can just go rewatch that, the end of the previous video. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill in this first quadrant really quickly, and then I will be right back. All right, so here is the first quadrant all filled out. So I have my degrees, my radians, and my coordinate points. It really doesn't matter the order that you guys fill this out in. Today I'm thinking I'm just gonna start with degrees, okay? So we already have the degrees that we have right now. And so as you guys can see, from 0 to 30, that's adding 30, right? So that's a 30. And then I can add another 30 to get to 60 and another 30 to get to 90. That pattern is going to continue. You can literally just keep adding 30 to the previous one to get your next numbers. These in-betweeners, how do you get from 30 to 45? You would add 15. So these smaller spaces, how do you get from here to here? You add 15 and then add another 15 to get to here. Okay, so that's literally all you're doing to get those values. So to start, if this is 90, then to get to this degree, we would add 30 because that's how much space this is. As you guys can see here, it's equivalent. So adding a 30 to a 90 is 120. And then if I add another 30 to that, that's 150. And then add another 30 and I'm at 180, which is a half circle, right? So then this middle one, 120 plus 15, right? So because that small space, 30 to 45 is 15. So I'm going to add 15 to get it to 120 to get 135. Okay. And then we just keep going with our degrees. So we continue that pattern. So starting at 180 to get to here, I'm going to add 30. So 180 plus 30 is 210. Then I can add another 30 to get to this one. 30, 30. And then I can get another 30 to get down here. 270. Okay. And then these little guys are the 15s. So 210 plus 15. 225. 270 plus 30, 300, plus another 30, 330, plus another 30, I already have my 360. And then 300 plus 15, so this guy is 315. So that is it. You're basically adding 30 or 15 to fill out the entire unit circle in terms of degrees. Okay, so that's how we go from 0 and make our way around to 360. Okay. Next up, I'm going to do coordinate points next. So let's start with these two. You guys see how from the center, this is a radius, right? And because this is a unit circle, that's 1 unit. So that's why this is 1, 0. So if I go to the left, this coordinate point would be to the left, -1 and up 0. Okay. Same thing if this one from the center was 0, 1, that means that this guy all the way down here is going to be 0, -1. Okay. So we have those 4 corners filled out in terms of our coordinate points. If you guys had a point over here like 1, 2, then what would that point be as a reflection over here? So if I were to reflect that point over the y-axis and end up here, instead of 1, 2, it would be -1, 2, right? So to remind you, these coordinate points are always going to be positive xy in quadrant 1, okay? Quadrant 2 we get a negative x value and a positive y, because in quadrant 2, we go to the left, which is negative x's, and then up, which is positive x's. And then quadrant 3 is negative x, negative y. Sorry. And then quadrant 4 is positive x and negative y. So these are going to mimic each of your coordinate points. But the cool thing is you guys don't have to refine these numbers. We're actually going to recycle these numbers. Why? Because they are literally just reflections over the x or the y axis. So these numbers will remain the same. So you don't even have to draw new triangles or do another 30, 60, 90. It's kind of nice. Okay, so if we look at this 30-degree mark, so 30 degrees up from the x-axis is root 3 comma negative 2. That same point reflected over to the second quadrant is going to be this one because it's 30 degrees away from the x-axis. So this point is literally the same as this one. So I'm going to write the same thing here as what's here. Root 3 over 2 comma a half. But the only difference is in quadrant 1, it's positive, positive. So quadrant 2, it's left and up. So it's negative positive. So we're going to make this negative root 3 over 2 comma a half. When you guys are writing, make sure I can clearly see your fractions and clearly see that it's a negative versus a positive, okay? And it's going to be the exact same thing. So if this guy's positive root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, so is this one. Just the only difference is the x is negative because it's in quadrant 2. And then this guy is 1/2 comma root 3 over 2. So this guy reflected over is also 1/2 root 3 over 2, but the x is negative. Then you can do the same thing with the third quadrant. So these two, because they're 30 degrees away from the x-axis, that point is going to be the same as this point. So root 3 over 2 and 1/2, but because it's in quadrant 3 and it went left and down, it's going to be double negative. All the points in quadrant 3 will be double negative. This one, the root 2's over 2's, same thing here. So these middle 45s will always be root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, just in quadrant 3, they're both negative. Down here, it's 60 degrees away from the x-axis, and so is this one, and so is this one. So all three of those points will be the same, which is 1/2 root 3 over 2. Just in quadrant 3, they're both negative. And then finally in quadrant 4, again, same old story. So this one, 30 degrees away from the x-axis, is root 3 over 2 comma a half, but because it's in quadrant 3, the y is negative. So it's negative 1/2. This guy, it's the 45-degree angle. So it's root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, but negative is the y. And then this guy is this one switched. So it's 1/2 root 3 over 2, but the y is negative and the x is positive. So that is how you fill out the coordinate points. Okay, so basically once you guys have this first quadrant figured out and memorized, things are a lot easier. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is the radians, which it's kind of like with degrees. We're basically going to kind of be counting by a certain number to get the hang of it. Okay, so let's start off with doesn't really matter the order you go in. I usually start with my 30 degrees. So for the moment, I'm going to be ignoring these middle ones. Okay, so these middle 45s, you're just going to completely skip over. We'll come back to them. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to be counting by the 30 degrees. So at 30 degrees, it's pi over 6, right? And this is technically 1 pi over 6, correct? So if I take 1 pi over 6 and I add another pi over 6, right? So 2 of these chunks together is 60 degrees, right? and that equals 2 pi over 6s, because I did 1 pi over 6 and 2 pi over 6. So this guy technically is 2 pi over 6, but when we reduce it, we get to pi over 3, right? So this is 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, so that would be 3 pi over 6. Notice how I'm adding 30 degrees every single time. So if this is 3 pi over 6, and we reduce it, it becomes pi over 2. So I'm just going to continue adding. So again, starting here, 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, because I took a total of 1 pi over 6 4 times to get to here. So this guy is 4 pi over 6, but you want to make sure you reduce that. So this fraction would reduce, 4 over 6 would reduce to 2 pi over 3. So that's 4 pi over 6 for 5 pi over 6, which doesn't reduce, so we're going to leave it as 5 pi over 6. Add another 30 degrees, and that's 6 pi over 6, which reduces to pi, which we all know 180 degrees is pi. Do you guys see how I did that? 1 pi over 6, and I keep adding the same chunk. 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6. And we're going to do that throughout the whole circle. So if this was 6 pi over 6, that means that another 30 degrees added would be 7 pi over 6. Again, I'm skipping over this little 45, not adding that much. I'm adding this much. So 7 plus another would be 8 pi over 6. What is 8 pi over 6 reduced to? 4 pi over 3. Add another, so that was 8. This is 9 pi over 6. When you reduce that, that's 3 pi over 2. So this was 9. This would be 10, which is 5 pi over 3. And then finally 11. Oops. So this is 11 pi over 6. And then if I finish it out, I get 12 pi over 6. And what is 12 over 6 reduced to? 2 pi. So I'm just literally counting by pi's over 6s and reducing as I need to. This is so much easier to count like this than for you guys to literally take 300, because I see a lot of people do this on their test. They'll go 300 times pi over 180 degrees, right? So their degrees cancel, then they reduce. Do you really want to do this math for every single point? You can, it's just time consuming, so I really don't recommend it. So counting is the best way to go. All right, so that's how I counted my 30 degree increments. Now we're gonna go back and do the middle one, so the 45 increments, okay? So I'm gonna start at 45, which is 1 pi over 4. And when I add another 45 to that, so 2 45s get me to 90 degrees. So if this is 1 pi over 4, then up here would be 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. So if this was 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, adding another would be 3 pi's over 4. Add another 4 pi over 4. What is 4 pi over 4 reduced to? Just pi. Add another, so 4 pi over 4 plus 1 is 5 pi over 4. Add another 6 pi over 4, which reduces. Add another 7 pi over 4. 7, 8 pi over 4 is 2 pi. So that's how I quickly and efficiently fill out the radians. And that's how you get your entire unit circle. So I hope that was helpful for those of you who struggled at all with filling this out. Again, you do really want to know the unit circle if you guys are going to choose to move on and be successful in this class and any other class. Have a good day.